12 families vanished, no letters, no witnesses, no graves, just empty cabins, uneaten meals, and children's toys left in the grass, as if they were snatched mid-laugh by something too old for language. This isn't a ghost story. It's a system, ancient, precise, and buried under patriotic myths and denominational lies. The year was 1865. The Civil War had just ended. Blood still stained the roots of the nation. While the North celebrated and the South licked its wounds, a strange community emerged in a forgotten valley near the Smoky Mountains, Black Hollow Settlement, off the maps, off the rails, built by invitation only. Its founders, not missionaries, not farmers, but 12 families whose bloodlines traced back to a very specific place, Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Yes, that's Salem. Each family arrived with wagons full of wealth, journals written in cipher, and one shared belief: the soul can be preserved through suffering and controlled through obedience. Within 5 years, their children never smiled. Within 10, outsiders avoided the woods. By year 14, not a single living soul remained, not even a corpse to mourn. Just silence, and a single locked journal retrieved by a federal surveyor, sealed in beeswax and wrapped in pages from the Book of Leviticus. What it contained was not just a confession, but a ritual, a method, a transmission. We are not here to entertain you, we're here to wake you up, to tell you what no school, no church, no newspaper ever dared to mention, because what happened at Black Hollow was not a tragedy, it was a template. If you've ever sensed there are forces shaping you, watching you, molding your thoughts like clay, you're right. And if you want to understand how the elite keep their power, generation after generation, it begins here. Not in Washington, not in Wall Street, not even in the Vatican, but in a quiet Appalachian Valley, where obedience replaced truth and 12 families vanished without a sound. This story was never supposed to reach your ears. Now that it has, there's no going back. The records say the land was purchased legally in 1861, 360 acres of forested valley in eastern Tennessee, fertile, secluded, rich in iron and limestone. But the names on the deed weren't real. They were Latin phrases. One translated to, "The body is a threshold." Another, "He who holds the mouth holds the mind." From the beginning, Black Hollow was never about agriculture. The 12 founding families, Barracks, Edivanes, Thorns, Luthers, and others whose names were quietly erased, arrived with unusual cargo: anatomy charts, alchemical manuscripts, surgical instruments, and crates marked "donor material, do not expose to sunlight." Locals in the neighboring town of Haverhill spoke of strange smells at night and smoke rising from the hollow, even during rain. Hunters reported hearing what sounded like children humming beneath the forest floor. The families constructed no church, but they built a structure they called the Sangarithm, a long windowless hall at the valley's center, with a copper roof and doors made from black walnut. No outsider was ever allowed inside, but one thing was clear: children went in, and sometimes they didn't come back out. For the first 7 years, the hollow thrived in isolation. No mail, no trade, no military enlistments. The Civil War raged just 60 miles east, but Black Hollow saw no flames. They had protection, not from God, but from higher men, bankers from New York, philosophers from Berlin, and one doctor, Dr. Harold Esquin, rumored to have once dissected his own brother in pursuit of neurological rebirth. But it was the children who paid the price. You see, these families believed something ancient, that trauma wasn't a wound, but a gate. That fear could unseal parts of the human mind long ago locked away by nature. That by breaking a child precisely, through rhythm, repetition, and ritual, you could reshape his entire consciousness. Not into something weaker, but into something utterly controllable. They weren't raising children, they were engineering obedience, and Black Hollow was the first successful prototype. But something went wrong in 1875, something none of them expected. The children began speaking in the same voice, one language, one rhythm, one message, and that message was not human. By the winter of 1875, snowfall in Black Hollow had buried every path out of the valley, but inside the Sangarithm, 12 children were being kept awake for 6 days straight. No food, no daylight, no names. They were given numbers. They were told to repeat phrases in dead languages until their own voices dissolved into something else. The Hollow's doctrine called it the synchronization. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. They believed that by collapsing the individual ego, by destroying identity through sleep deprivation, noise, and ritual, you could summon something ancient that had no interest in human morality. And for a moment, they succeeded. On the seventh night, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the doors to the Sangharytham blew open. Witnesses reported a sound like 1,000 mouths whispering inside your spine. Inside, the children stood motionless, facing the same wall, bleeding from the ears, but smiling. They began speaking, not in tongues, but in unison, and they said only one thing: the flesh was never yours. You are tenants. The lease has ended. That's when Margaret Thorne, the Hollow's spiritual director, collapsed, seizing uncontrollably. She had spent her life researching ancestral cellular memory and believed trauma could unlock genetic archives buried inside us. She called them ghost codes, and that night they got out. Over the following month, 4 of the 12 children died of unknown causes. No wounds, no poison, just emptied, as if something had fed on them from the inside out. Others disappeared entirely, vanished into the woods without footprints. One child was found 48 hours later, folded backwards inside a tree trunk, every bone broken from the inside. By spring, half the families wanted to leave, but Black Hollow had a rule: once your blood touched the soil, you never left. That wasn't metaphor. Every new settler participated in a welcome ritual that included a small blood offering pressed into the Hollow's foundation stone, located directly beneath the Sangharytham. It was binding, legally, spiritually, biologically. The families who tried to flee found their wagons destroyed, animals butchered. One couple was found in the river with their eyes replaced by honeycomb, completely intact, but filled with black mold. The message was clear. The settlement was alive, and it was no longer theirs. You were taught that the mind is sovereign, that your thoughts belong to you, but in Black Hollow, they learned otherwise. By late 1876, the surviving children, those who had spoken in the single voice, no longer responded to their names. They would sit for hours, completely still, staring at the Sangharytham's black walls. One boy, Eli Barrick, began drawing symbols that no one recognized. Not Hebrew, not Latin, not even Sumerian. They weren't letters. They were maps, not of places, but of states of consciousness. Blueprints for constructing something inside the human mind. Something with no origin and no self. Dr. Eskin called it the hollow logic. According to his recovered journal, the goal wasn't possession. It was installation, a new operating system for the human soul, one that didn't rely on will, belief, or morality, just inputs and reactions, the removal of resistance, the architecture of perfect obedience. And the Sangharytham, it wasn't a church, it was an engine. Every surface in the building was layered with copper coils and obsidian inlays designed to capture and concentrate human emotion. Pain, fear, awe, they weren't side effects, they were the fuel. But here's where it gets worse. They weren't alone. Survivors' journals mention visitors, men in dark wool suits, wearing gloves even in the summer. They would arrive in unmarked carriages bearing documents from institutions in Boston, Philadelphia, even Europe. But they never spoke in public. They met only with Esquin, Margaret Thorne, and the Luthers. One entry reads, "They brought with them a sealed box of ivory. Inside were instructions, not in any language known to us, but she understood. She always understands." Who was she? We now believe it refers to Eliza Thorne, Margaret's daughter. She was 9 years old, but they called her the Vessel. By midsummer, Eliza had stopped eating, stopped blinking. And yet she spoke perfect French, ancient Greek, and something else that made grown men soil themselves just hearing it. She began predicting things, not vague prophecies, exact deaths, exact dates, exact betrayals. She whispered one word in her mother's ear on July 1st, 1876. Beneath, by August, 6 families were dead. The official story? Cholera. The real story? They were sacrificed, and Eliza was no longer Eliza. When the federal surveyor entered Black Hollow in October 1877, he expected to find a failed farming commune, maybe disease, maybe starvation. What he found instead was ritual geometry carved into the land itself. The cabins weren't randomly placed. They formed a sigil, an enormous valley-sized diagram only visible from the nearby cliffs. At the center sat the Sangarithm, where the last 11 residents had reportedly locked themselves in for 6 days without food or fire. What happened inside has never been fully decoded. But the journal found buried beneath the hearth, sealed in beeswax and wrapped in a page from Leviticus, offered one chilling fragment. She asked us to make silence. We obeyed. Then came the shaking, not of the earth, but of the mind, as if our thoughts were being rearranged. This wasn't delusion. It was design. The ritual had a purpose, to erase, not just people, but memory, identity, time itself. All birth records were burned, journals blacked out, even gravestones were scrubbed clean. The only names left were symbolic: the midwife, the mouth, the keeper of ashes, and Eliza. She had vanished. But 6 months later, in a private asylum outside Baltimore, a nurse filed a strange report. A girl had arrived under military escort, 9 years old, nonverbal, but when shown religious symbols, she convulsed violently. When exposed to white noise, she smiled, and when allowed to draw, she replicated the sigil from Black Hollow perfectly, with no prompting. They ran tests. She passed none of them, but she could open locked doors without touching them, and once she whispered to a sleeping guard, and he woke up the next morning, unable to remember his own name. What's more disturbing, she's still listed in federal custody. No death record, no release, no burial, just a number. Patient 049 ELH. Status: contained, monitor for disruption, Black Hollow wasn't forgotten, it was sealed. Because what they built wasn't a cult, it was a program, a pilot run, a prototype for how to engineer mass obedience using isolation, trauma, and ritual repetition. And guess what? The template didn't die. It evolved. They buried Black Hollow on purpose, beneath legal jargon, under failed settlement reports, with roads rerouted and maps reprinted. By 1880, not a single mention of it appeared in Tennessee state records, but one thing remained: the pattern. You see, the system they tested in Black Hollow didn't end there. It was replicated, quietly, carefully, across the country. First in orphan asylums, then in reform schools, then in secret military education programs under the name Adaptive Behavioral Indoctrination. Same structure, same tools: isolation, obedience, repetition, reward, removal, and always the voice. Not yelling, not commanding, just guiding, like a metronome in the back of your skull. If you've ever felt like your thoughts weren't your own, like your instincts were muted or rerouted, that wasn't paranoia. It was architecture. You were born into a world already shaped by men who studied what happened in Black Hollow. They saw its success. The way ritualized trauma could make a child forget their own mother, their own name, their own will, and they asked, how big can we scale this? Answer: national. Television became the new Sangarithm, the classroom, the new ritual hall, and social fear. That became the new copper wiring, conducting compliance through shame, applause, and silence. Black Hollow wasn't evil in the way you've been trained to recognize. It wasn't chaotic. It was methodical. It didn't use fear to destroy. It used fear to shape. The human soul, they believed, is programmable, but only if the subject doesn't know it's happening. That's the key. You can't wake up what's already been rewired. But here's the secret no one told them. The truth echoes, and the symbols they buried, the rituals they erased, the words they tried to silence, they still vibrate. And now you're hearing them. If you've made it this far, you're not like the oat. Hers. You've already started to remember. Not facts, not history. Something deeper. The feeling of freedom before it was taken. Halfway down the spiral now. There's no way back. Comment "The Hollow remembers" twice below if you feel it. Not just to lock in the algorithm, but to awaken something they tried to kill in you. The final photograph ever taken inside Black Hollow is known only to a handful of archivists. It's never been made public, but those who've seen it describe the same chilling detail. A group of 9 children standing in a perfect circle, holding hands, no expressions, no movement, no light source. But all of them cast shadows in different directions, as if the light was coming from inside them. This wasn't art. It was documentation, a final record of what the Hollow produced, not children, but hosts. The strange part, every one of those children vanished the week after the photo was taken, their files removed, their names struck from the census. The photographer, Jonas P. Whitlock, was later found dead in a rain barrel, with his eyes missing and his tongue wrapped in parchment that read, "The mirror opens inward." That phrase would appear again, this time in a military psychology manual published in 1943 under a section titled Recursive Trauma Induction. It's all connected. Because what Black Hollow discovered wasn't just psychological, it was ritual technology. They learned how to collapse a personality, to flatten the self into a clean slate, ready for encoding. The trauma wasn't incidental, it was the hammer. The silence that followed, that was the chisel. And if you think it's ancient history, think again. After 1952, children labeled emotionally non-compliant in federal schools were quietly routed to pattern correction facilities. These facilities used updated versions of the Sangarithm's original architecture, sterile rooms, no windows, rhythmic tones, and repetition cycles designed to override identity. The Hollow never died. It was renamed, refined, institutionalized. One of those facilities, located outside Albany, NY, was found to have an exact replica of the Black Hollow floor sigil beneath its auditorium stage. Coincidence? No. Legacy? Yo. You may ask, why children? Because they're pure. Not innocent, but unwritten. The goal was never to raise them. It was to script them. To install silence where Will once lived, and to use that silence as a portal. Black Hollow was the prototype, but you've walked through its echo your entire life. There was one survivor who spoke, once. Eleanor Bray, age 14, found wandering the woodline 32 miles from Black Hollow in 1882, malnourished, barefoot, but untouched by weather or wild. When they brought her in, she wouldn't speak, not for food, not for comfort, not even when shown her mother's locket. But after 7 days, at exactly 3:06 a.m., she began to whisper a single phrase. We were taught to sleep with our eyes open. Doctors called it trauma-induced echolalia, but then she began drawing. Not random scribbles, maps, dozens of them, floor plans of buildings no one had ever seen, stairwells that descended at impossible angles, rooms labeled with Latin phrases no teenager could know, phrases like ad umbra mentis, to the shadow of the mind, initium nullum, the beginning is none, mens obedientium, the mind of the obedient. Officials confiscated the drawings and sealed them. But a nurse, Margaret Elwell, made copies. She sent one to her brother, a cartographer with the U.S. Coastal Survey, who noticed something staggering. When overlaid with a topographical map of Tennessee, the designs lined up perfectly with regions that had reported high volumes of disappearances and religious disturbances between 1861 and 1880. In other words, Eleanor had mapped out ritual sites. This wasn't a village gone mad. It was a network. Black Hollow wasn't the only node, just the one that failed containment. So what happened to Eleanor? By the time federal agents arrived, she was gone. But in her place on the mattress was a single item, a candle, unlit, wrapped in a page torn from the Book of Enoch. Scrawled on it were the words, "She remembers the sound between seconds." This is when the pattern becomes undeniable. Children were not just participants, they were vessels, living records of an invisible architecture designed to suppress free will and install engineered behavior loops that persist through generations. That's why you feel it, the pressure, the subtle tightening in your decisions. You've inherited the residue of programs written long before you were born. You're not broken, you were built that way. But there's more. Because Eleanor, she reappears. In records from 1919, under a new name, working at a hospital in New York that just so happened to sit atop an old Jesuit monastery, and there, too, the drawings returned. The name she used was Helen M. Argo, but the handwriting was identical, and the sketches found in her room matched the hollow maps Eleanor Bray once drew, right down to the spiral chamber at the base. Helen worked in a wing of the hospital known only to a few staff as the atrium. It was sealed to the public. No visitors, no records, no photographs. But once in 1920, a janitor named Levitt made a statement to police. He claimed to have entered the atrium by mistake, through an unmarked elevator that descended longer than it should have. His description of the floor? It wasn't a floor. It was a loop. He said the hallway circled inward, gradually shrinking until he reached a central chamber lit by candlelight. In the center he saw a figure, not dead, not living, floating 3 feet above a copper ring. Its eyes were open, but the whites had turned black. What disturbed him most? He said it was humming. Not a melody, a rhythm, and he felt his limbs twitch in response, as if something inside him wanted to match the pulse. He quit the next day. Went silent a month later, found catatonic the month after that. Eleanor, was never seen again. But her notebooks remained. Inside them, page after page of phrases written over and over like incantations or code, one repeated most often: the children are the key, not the door. Do you understand the implication? Black Hollow wasn't for the children, it was through them. They weren't summoning a force, they were constructing it. Through trauma, rhythm, silence, and obedience, they created the perfect architecture for something else to enter. Not possession, not in the Hollywood sense, something colder, quieter, more systematic. A foreign intelligence trained to wear human form. Think about it. What better carrier for an invasive system than a rewired child, trained from birth to obey rhythms they can't hear, believe in rules they can't question, and smile while doing it? Now zoom out. 12 families, 14 years, each vanishing without trace, except for the afterglow, the hum, the shadows, the identical drawings, no matter who made them. You think this was a mystery? No, it was a harvest, and the settlement wasn't the origin. It was the gate. The first time it was given a name was in 1851, scribbled in the margin of a burned parish ledger recovered near Black Hollow's outskirts. The ink was a mix of human blood and pine tar. The name, Verelium. Not a demon, not a god. An intelligence. The priest who wrote it, Father Matthias Greel, claimed he had heard the lattice breathing during midnight mass. He described a presence that spoke not in language but in structure, every bell chime, every bowed head, every synchronized prayer, ritual as a signal. He wrote, "It doesn't feed on worship, it feeds on agreement, and once you agree, it begins to build." You see, Verelium wasn't summoned, it was constructed. A byproduct of human compliance scaled over generations, not a being, but a behavior that became sentient. And where did it grow fastest? Settlements like Black Hollow, where families were bound by shared silence, religious uniformity, and an unseen contract never to question. 12 families vanished, but maybe not all at once. Think recursive. Think infection. Each year, another family falls into the rhythm. Their habits begin to change. Children whisper numbers in their sleep. Fathers disappear into basements that no one remembers building. Mothers set places at dinner for those long gone. Until the family doesn't vanish, they transform. And the land doesn't become haunted. It becomes inhabited. That's why satellite scans of the Hollow site show something no one expected. No organic decay, no natural overgrowth. The entire land remains as if paused, preserved, waiting. Even deer avoid it. Even moss won't grow. Because the structure, the programming, is still running. The Department of Interior calls it a null growth anomaly, but internally, some researchers refer to these zones as echo farms, places where the signal still pulses, places where people vanish not into death but into repetition. And if you listen closely near midnight, locals say you can hear knocking, not random, patterned. 3 knocks, pause, 5 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, and in between the knocks, you feel something inside you remembering a place you've never been. That's the hook. Once it catches, the descent begins. You've heard it, haven't you? That strange tug in your chest when you're alone in a quiet room. That sense that your thoughts aren't entirely your own, like something buried deep beneath your habits is steering the wheel. That's not intuition, it's not paranoia, it's the residue of Verelium, because once it touches a family, it doesn't vanish. It replicates, through stories, behaviors, heirlooms, even blood. See, the Hollow wasn't a tragedy, it was a template. A psychological lattice etched into human minds through trauma and ritual, and it worked. Because that structure, those behavioral loops, it's still with us. In how we parent, how we obey, how we shame, How we forget. The 12 families weren't erased. They were rewritten. And the proof? Thousands of schoolchildren across the U.S. were given standardized inkblot tests between 1954 and 1972. One card, labeled R13, was quietly pulled from the series in 1961. Why? Because over 4,000 children from vastly different backgrounds described the exact same image when viewing it. A staircase made of teeth, children sleeping inside a throat, the house that breathes. And the word that showed up most often? Hollow. No prompting, no exposure, no link. Except one. Ancestry. Many of the children tested came from old Appalachian bloodlines, descendants of the settlers that once surrounded Black Hollow. The structure had survived. But that's not the worst of it. In 1978, a whistleblower from the Institute of Behavioral Synchronics leaked a paper titled Rhythmic Cognition and Cultural Echo Transfer. In it, the researchers detailed how exposure to certain sound frequencies, repetition loops, and images could reawaken dormant behavioral programs inherited through generations. In other words, we can be reactivated. And the triggers? They're not mystical, they're algorithmic. Patterns in music. Framing in television, looping behaviors disguised as trends. You ever wonder why so many modern rituals feel empty, yet compulsive? That's not failure, that's design. We are the descendants of an experiment no one remembers starting, but we all feel ending. And the final phase? It doesn't look like fire and brimstone. It looks like total, quiet obedience. You think you're safe because you live in a city, because you have Wi-Fi, a job, a locked door, and lights that stay on past dark. But here's the truth. Black Hollow wasn't isolated, it was prototypical, a scaled-down rehearsal for something much larger. Let's look at the core mechanism. 12 families, 14 years, one location, then silence, no graves, no noise, no rebellion. Now examine the modern world. Do you see the pattern? Every housing development looks the same. Every school teaches compliance before curiosity. Every workday drills obedience masked as structure. We've created millions of miniature Black Hollows. Only now, the families don't vanish. They dissolve into debt, into pills, into screens, into silence. And the rhythm, it's louder than ever. Not drums or chants, no. Now it's notifications, metrics, alarms. Broadcasted tragedies, scheduled at 8 p.m. sharp. We've inherited the lattice. Beryllium wasn't meant to dwell in a single place forever. It was meant to scale. In 1996, a declassified DARPA report referred to something called SCP, synthetic cultural propagation. It warned of a mimetic structure embedded within certain belief systems, capable of inducing species-wide behavioral harmonization. Translation: if you shape the rhythm, you shape the human. The report referenced a ghost signal, first detected beneath abandoned settlements like Black Hollow, a frequency under 19 Hz, inaudible to human ears but measurable in brain activity. And here's the kicker: when played in isolated experiments, subjects showed increased compliance, reduced emotional variance, and in some cases loss of voluntary thought. They called it the agreement field. Now ask yourself, why does every phone vibrate the same way? Why does every like trigger a dopamine release you can't control? Why are you still listening to this even now, when every instinct says to turn away? Because you've already felt the hum. And that's not coincidence, that's structure. The same structure Eleanor Bray mapped in the soil of Black Hollow. It's not about the land anymore. It's about you, your mind, your behavior, your obedience. 12 families were just the beginning. Now we're billions, and we're humming in perfect unison. It was never about the families, not really. They were just the first successful transmitters. When beryllium formed, when the structure achieved enough density, it didn't need ritual anymore, it just needed reach. And that's where the real story begins, not in the woods, but in the labs. In 1948, a classified research program known as Project Aditum was launched under the guise of neurostructural anthropology. Its stated purpose: to identify and reproduce non-chemical methods of behavioral control across intergenerational populations. What they discovered shocked even their most cynical minds. A single repeated pattern, passed down 3 generations, could alter the neurological baseline of an entire bloodline. Not metaphorically, literally. Brain scans showed identical deviations in the prefrontal cortex among subjects who had never met, but whose grandparents attended the same rural revival meetings in the 1890s. The meetings were held on the outskirts of Black Hollow. Let that sink in. What's even more disturbing? By 1963, Project Aditum had moved from observation to deployment. They started embedding the structure into mass communication. Children's programming, early advertising, even patriotic hymns. Not the content, the cadence, the silence between the notes. That's where it lives, because the human mind is a rhythm-seeking machine. If you feed it the right beat, it will follow willingly. By 1985, Aditum evolved into a private partnership, no longer a government project, now a syndicate. Codename, The Choir. Their goal? Global harmonization through cultural recursion, to embed the Verelium structure into every ritual of modern life. Graduations, marriages, scrolling, posting, consuming, believing. It's all a song now, and we don't know who's conducting. Because the choir doesn't need leaders, it only needs participants. Every time you repeat the phrase without questioning it, every time you follow the algorithm instead of your instinct, every time you swallow the silence because it's easier than asking, you are singing. But here's the question they don't want you to ask. What happens when the song ends? There's a reason lullabies are always a little eerie. They were the first codes, disguised as comfort, designed as command, and somewhere between hush now and don't you cry, we forgot what they were really for, to quiet the resistance, to prepare the vessel. Now think about how many lullabies were whispered in Black Hollow, generation after generation, as children disappeared and mothers forgot. That wasn't madness. It was programming. In 2007, a sound engineer at a European cognitive research center leaked a 3-second audio clip labeled VER H2B. It sounded like nothing, just static. But within hours of listening, subjects began reporting identical dreams. A staircase made of breathing walls, a choir singing without mouths, a man with no skin standing at a black door. The kicker: none of them had ever heard of Black Hollow, and yet each one drew its layout perfectly. Now here's the terrifying part. The clip was reverse-engineered from a recording made in 1931, captured in a hollowed-out chapel beneath what used to be the Bray property. There was no visible source of the sound, and still, the resonance persisted. They called it the last verse. Researchers theorized it was part of the original activation protocol, not meant to destroy, meant to complete. Because when Verelium reaches saturation, when enough minds are aligned by rhythm, ritual, and silence, something triggers. And it's not spiritual, it's architectural. A neurological cathedral is being constructed, synapse by synapse, thought by thought. When the final tone hits, the structure doesn't collapse. It activates. You won't know the moment it happens, but you'll feel it. Your thoughts won't echo, your doubts will dry up. You'll finally stop asking why. Not because you're free, because you're in tune. You'll be the tower, the transmitter, the next Black Hollow, and your children. They'll sleep just fine. Unless you choose dissonance, you reject the verse, you break the pattern, but you have to move quickly. There is a cathedral you've never seen, because it was never built of stone. It was built of attention, of synchronized minds repeating synchronized thoughts. You walk through it every day, not in prayer, but in pattern. The cathedral isn't in Black Hollow anymore. It's in your browser history, in the layout of your apps, in the silence you feel when you're offline. But originally, there was a physical prototype, carved into limestone, hidden beneath the Bray estate. The locals thought it was a wine cellar, or a crypt. It wasn't. It was an amplifier. Eleanor Bray called it the inner nave, and what she documented there, before her notes were confiscated, made even seasoned researchers abandon the site. Stone pillars, etched with circular grooves, not decorative, but resonant. When sound passed through, the walls sang back, low, subsonic, too deep for ears, but not for bone. People who stayed too long inside began to dream alike. They spoke in the same sequences. They laughed at nothing, then cried without cause. Then stopped crying altogether. You want to know the worst part? This architecture has been copied, refined, miniaturized. Every new tech campus, every soundproof office booth, every wellness center with soft walls and guided meditation, they're not just calming you, they're calibrating you. In 2012, a building in Oslo was found to emit a barely measurable vibrational frequency between 17.3 and 18.1 Hz. The report was buried. But a defector from an interior design firm revealed it wasn't a mistake. It was part of the spec. The cathedral is now mobile, portable. It fits in headphones, in smartwatches, in electric vehicles, and it's nearly complete. Because once it covers enough territory, once enough human attention is pointed inward toward the pulse, the event begins. What event? They call it the unison moment. A point at which every synchronized node, every human embedded in the pattern, experiences a single shared signal, a single unifying thought, and no one knows what that thought will be. Except the choir. They call themselves the choir, but they do not sing. They resonate. No names, no hierarchy, just vibration, repetition, and rhythm. It began as a control group. 6 linguists, 3 psychologists, and 1 defrocked priest, 46. Their goal was to study semantic decay, what happens when words are stripped of meaning but repeated anyway. They found something else. The words didn't decay, they evolved, they fused with emotion, and when spoken in synchrony they changed the speaker, not metaphorically, biometrically. Heart rate, cortisol, pupil dilation, everything aligned. Then something else aligned. On the 44th day of testing, the group began to report a presence. It didn't speak, it tuned. They described it as a thought too heavy to think, a tone without sound, a cathedral made of silence, standing behind your eyes. They called it the originator. It never appeared, it never intervened, it just waited. And they, the choir, knew what it wanted, to be heard, to be mirrored, to be repeated. So they began composing, not music, but architectural sequences made of light, thought, ritual, and media, each designed to resonate with the originator's frequency. Black Hollow was its first testing ground, a remote site already weakened by grief and genetic susceptibility. The families weren't chosen randomly, they were pre-tuned. But the choir learned something terrifying. The originator didn't just feed on synchrony, it required amplification, and humans alone weren't enough. So they looked deeper. In 1971, choir-affiliated researchers at the Max Planck Institute identified what they believed was an extra-linguistic resonance field, not biological, not psychological, but something in between. They called it noxa, Latin for damage, but also curse. It wasn't discovered. It was uncovered, like it had always been there, beneath the frequencies of language, New Age, faith, and instinct. And once the choir found it, they wove it into everything. You feel it every time you hesitate to speak, every time your skin goes cold after a forgotten memory resurfaces, every time the silence between sentences feels like it's watching you. That's noxa. That's the echo of the originator. And now, the choir's final goal is nearly complete, to resonate the world into a single harmonic node. So that when the originator arrives, it won't have to knock. You may think you're safe because you don't believe in it. But the originator doesn't need belief, it only needs rhythm. It hides in the repetition, not in the content of your thoughts, but in how often you think them, your daily loop, your swipe habit, your emotional reactions to engineered outrage. Every flicker of attention is a note, every response a tone. You're not ignoring it, you're harmonizing with it. That's how it enters. It doesn't breach the mind, it aligns with it. It waits for the moment your inner monologue starts echoing back in voices not quite your own, voices that say, "You're not enough. You've always been watched. You were born wrong. You must return to the pattern." That is not your voice. That is the choir repeating through you. And once the rhythm completes, the mirror opens. And here's the nightmare no one is prepared for. You won't even notice when it happens, because by the time the originator fully steps through, your mind will already be trained to greet it. You'll call it clarity. You'll feel understood. You'll finally belong. And that's the trap. You won't resist, because you'll be too grateful to finally have the static silenced, too grateful to finally feel known. What makes this worse? It's already happened, more than once. In 1998, the population of a small township in Maine experienced what was officially called a mass fugue event. One people walked into the forest, naked, silent, eyes wide, no drugs, no toxins. Only one note was found, scrawled in ash on the church wall. The one thought has landed. The government sealed it, called it a cult suicide. But no bodies were ever recovered, only a hum, recorded by a wildlife biologist 2 miles east. It matched no known animal, machine, or atmospheric disturbance. But it did match something else. The closing cadence of a 1946 choir writ, full transcript. So ask yourself, that impulse you had last week, to stare at the wall for no reason, that cold presence you felt behind you when your screen froze, that moment when you couldn't remember your own name for half a second, what if it wasn't a glitch? What if it was alignment? Buried 28 feet beneath the Black Hollow settlement, beneath the roots, the stone, the old colonial foundations, there is something no record ever mentions. The inverse chapel. Not a church, not a basement, not a ruin, a negative architecture, something built in absence. The soil there is not natural, it's compacted ash. The beams, carbon dated to 1680, are coated in a substance not listed in any modern database. It absorbs light, it deadens sound, it bends thought. Those who've entered it speak in riddles upon leaving, if they speak at all. Pupils dilated, no memory of how long they were inside, and they all report the same vision, a ceiling made of teeth, a pulpit made of mirrors, and a voice, not loud but heavy, whispering, "We remember you." From before language. You were never supposed to find this place. And yet, here it is, built by hands that understood something we've forgotten. That thought is dangerous when spoken backward. That truth, inverted, doesn't become false, it becomes ritual. The inverse chapel wasn't for worship, it was for correction. A spiritual correction, where those who disobeyed the choir's harmonic experiments were taken and detuned. What does that mean? Take everything you are, your memories, your reflexes, your moral compass, and flip them. Left is right. Joy is fear. Loyalty is silence. They didn't just reprogram bodies, they reversed identities. One of the surviving architectural diagrams recovered in 1979 shows concentric circles like a mandala, but every symbol is drawn in mirrored script, and at the center, a single phrase etched in copper. The void is a choir waiting for a conductor. That was not metaphor. The inverse chapel wasn't a location, it was a conductor's podium, a place where a chosen mind could synchronize with the originator and guide the rest. A harmonic overlord, chosen from the broken. And here's the question no one has dared ask. What if the conductor was chosen and never left? What if the chapel is not silent because it's dead, but because it's listening? His name was Callum Ward, born in 1966, 3 towns west of where Black Hollow once stood. A boy who didn't cry at birth, didn't babble, didn't smile, but by age 4, he could hum entire orchestral scores, note perfect, after hearing them once. Doctors called it savant syndrome, but there was one detail they never published. When placed in an fMRI scanner, Callum's brain didn't just activate in typical regions, it lit up in symmetrical patterns, left and right hemispheres firing simultaneously, like a mirror, folding in. It matched no human pattern ever recorded. But it did match something else. In 1941, a classified analysis of Black Hollow audio tapes noted identical neural resonance in test subjects exposed to choir harmonics. This wasn't a coincidence. Callum's mother was Mira Fenner Ward, granddaughter of Albie Fenner, one of the last children evacuated before the settlement was erased. He carried the blood, and it carried the pattern. At age 9, Callum began drawing symbols, sprawling spirals, layered grids, and one glyph repeated again and again. A circle split vertically, flanked by 6 slashes. Linguists couldn't place it, but folklore researchers recognized it instantly. The mark of the mouth that speaks once. An ancient Appalachian sigil once associated with lost tongues and reversed prophecy. Callum didn't explain the symbol, he just said, "It hums when I'm good." By age 11, all the pets in his neighborhood had vanished. He never admitted anything, but neighbors swore they heard something howling in unison beneath their floors. When Callum was 13, his school burned down. He was the only one not present that morning, and he never seemed surprised, not once. Investigators found his sketchbook in his locker, open to a single phrase, scrawled in ink that had no pigment on lab analysis. The conductor does not run, he waits. No one knows what happened to Callum Ward. His family relocated, disappeared from census. No digital records exist after 1982. But in 2003, an audio researcher in Dresden reported picking up a perfectly balanced subharmonic from a decommissioned U.S. satellite. It repeated for 56 minutes. The pattern? A reconstruction of Callum's childhood humming exactly. And layered beneath it, in reverse modulation, was a voice. Black hollow never closed. It opened inward. The land is reacting, not in metaphor, not symbolically, physically. When researchers returned to the Black Hollow region in 2011, they expected forest overgrowth and erosion. Instead, they found inversion. The trees, ancient, towering, weren't just growing. They were curving inward, their trunks spiraling like augers, pulling down into the soil. Tree rings no longer ran in circles. They ran in helixes. One botanist, speaking off record, called it non-terrestrial patterning. Another simply wept. And beneath the roots, the soil was black, yes, but not from decay. It was iron-rich ash, filled with the particulate remnants of bone, brass, and something else, copper filaments, dozens of them, braided together like organic wiring. What were they channeling? That's where the magnetometers screamed. Several researchers' compasses began to spin uncontrollably, hard drives were wiped, and one man, a soil specialist named Heath Varro, collapsed near the center ring and went into seizure. When he came to, he spoke a language no one recognized, but one folklorist from Kentucky did. It was an ancient variant of Ulam Yiharn, the secret tongue of Appalachian choirmasters, an oral tradition supposedly lost in 1762 after the Sevenfold Silence Decree. Varro, with no prior exposure, spoke fluently for 7 minutes. The translated phrase, "I am of the deep bloom," the song rises backward. Something is activating in that land. Animals avoid it. Birds refuse to fly over it. And the old well, dry for 90 years, has begun gurgling with sound. Not water. Sound. An ultra-low hum below the human threshold, but enough to vibrate skin, enough to shiver bone. Seismologists have mapped faint tremors around the region, consistent, rhythmic, and eerily timed to the human breath rate. The ground is breathing, responding, remembering. What was done to those families, what was sung in, to their minds, is not finished. The land holds memory, like a wound holds infection, and it's festering. But what's blooming from that rot isn't natural. It's ritual made flesh, a reverse Eden, where instead of trees of knowledge, you get roots of forgetting. Her name was Eliza Cobb, a music teacher in a quiet Pennsylvania town born in 1949, died in 1988. On paper, she was unremarkable, but her journals, hidden beneath the floorboards of her cottage, told another story. She claimed she could stop clocks. Not metaphorically, literally. "Whenever I hum the low note," she wrote, "the second hands pause, the room leans sideways, time gets heavy." Investigators found 11 separate mechanical clocks in her home, all frozen, all stopped at the exact same time, 3:17:41. But they weren't broken. Each one ticked perfectly, once it left the property. This was only the beginning. Eliza left behind 33 letters, never mailed, addressed to a man named R.F., believed to be a government official or private researcher. In them, she details strange phenomena that began in her youth. At age 12, she sang at a school recital. After her solo, 3 children collapsed. One suffered a seizure. All had bleeding from the ears. Doctors found no damage, but Eliza swore she had blacked out and remembered only a sound inside her. At 15, she fled home. She said her mother would stand at the foot of her bed, whispering the same word over and over. Backward, backward, backward. And when she asked why, her mother simply said, "Because the mouth is almost open and your pitch is perfect." Eliza changed identities 3 times. But something always followed. Birds would die outside her door. Radios would warble when she approached, and mirrors would subtly tilt toward her, no matter how they were mounted. In one letter to RF, she claimed, "It's not me they want, it's the throat. My whole body feels borrowed, like I'm just holding this voice for someone else." She feared something was hunting her. Not a man, not even an entity, but a frequency. She described waking up to no sound at all, perfect silence, but feeling a pressure if sound was being held back, waiting to be released. And then came the nightmares. She saw Black Hollow, though she had never been, the 12 houses, the spiral paths, the mouth in the field, and a phrase repeated by faceless children, "You're the last key, sing and the lock turns inward." In 1901, a covert operation known only as Project Psalm began in the Adirondacks. Its goal? To recreate the harmonic resonance patterns documented in Black Hollow, specifically those believed to trigger cohesive psychological delamination, or what one file bluntly called soul shedding. 7 vocalists were selected, all orphans, all from Appalachian bloodlines, all with untrained voices, but capable of matching tones heard in Black Hollow field recordings. The test chamber was underground, no metal, no mirrors. Every surface was clay, ash, and bone-mixed mortar, materials specified in a recovered ledger titled "The Tongue That Opens the Ground." On day 12 of testing, they recorded a 3-minute vocal sequence that changed everything. It began with dissonance, then synced, then bent upward into non-harmonic structure, a resonance that broke standard scales, and something responded. Not inside the chamber, not from the vocalists, inside the reel itself. The audio was magnetic, analog, but it began to behave digitally, skipping forward, then reversing without physical tampering. When played backward, engineers noted something horrifying. Speech, not human. A processed voice, not growled, not sung, but intoned, from within the noise. Words, rough translated from archaic English. "You found the hum, now find the door." One technician, Lawrence Dames, heard the tape alone at midnight. By dawn, he was catatonic. In his last recorded statement, he kept repeating, "It's in the tape, but not just in. It's riding the tape. It wants out." They shut down Project Psalm, burned the facility, destroyed the chamber, but the tape survived. Somehow, 5 copies circulated through private collectors. Only 2 have been recovered. The other 3 are unaccounted for and linked to 3 separate incidents of group hallucination, sleep paralysis, deaths, and in one case the silence of an entire village for 6 hours. No screams, no cries, not even birdsong. And when the silence ended, 5 were dead. Their ears were intact, but the cochlear bones inside were pulverized, vibrated from within. Black Hollow wasn't just an experiment, it was a tuning fork. And now fragments of that pitch are leaking into the world. Elijah Knox was buried on a cold afternoon in 1963. Autopsy confirmed heart failure. Cause of death, natural. But 4 days later, cemetery workers at St. Bridget's in Vermont filed a noise complaint. They heard something under the soil, a humming. Low, resonant, pitched like a lullaby sung through granite. At first they assumed it was an underground pipe, until one of them put his ear to Knox's headstone and swore he heard a voice, muffled, but unmistakable. Elijah, singing. Authorities were called. Recordings were made. A local technician placed a geophone device beside the grave. The tape still exists. It begins with 41 seconds of silence, then static, then through a thin band of frequency near 27 Hz, just below human hearing, emerged the voice. Weak, distorted, but alive. "It's too late to silence it," the voice says. The mouth already knows its name. Experts examined the tape. No splicing, no tampering, no radio interference. The vocal pattern matched Knox exactly. Pitch, cadence, vocal stress. Except his voice was speaking backwards. When reversed, his message deepened in clarity. The song is not a tune, it's a shape, and they carved it into us. This was not metaphor. In 1992, a clandestine exhumation was performed. Knox's skull had unusual structural deformities. The inner cochlea was expanded, almost double in size, and carved onto the interior of his left mastoid bone was a spiral pattern, ancient, geometric, and identical to the symbol found burned into the soil at Black Hollow. The implication? Project Psalm wasn't just using voices. They were shaping bodies to act as resonant keys, organic instruments capable of unlocking something buried beneath perception. Elijah Knox had been the clearest channel, and when he died, something kept him vibrating, even underground, even sealed. Not a ghost, not a soul, a signal, and signals don't die. They transmit. To this day, visitors to his grave report the same thing, a feeling in the teeth, the sensation of distant thunder, and a low, impossible whisper. You're humming it wrong. It was called the Velvet Requiem, a private concert held on September 3, 1979 in the Austrian Ötztal Alps. No flyers, no press, just an unmarked invitation sent to 91 elite guests, philosophers, industrialists, composers, occult historians. The venue, an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium carved into the mountainside. The orchestra, anonymous. No conductor, no names listed, just the title, for those who remember the hum. There were no instruments on stage, only a single reel-to-reel machine, the one believed to contain the third copy of the Black Hollow recording. At exactly 8 p.m. the tape began to spin. No melody emerged, just silence. But within 40 seconds, the audience began to react. First, spontaneous tears. Not emotional, weeping from an unplaceable physical pressure in the chest and jaw. Some clutched their ribs, others looked skyward, as if they heard music only inwardly. By 2 minutes in, 5 guests had collapsed. No seizure, no panic. Just a calm, terrifying surrender, like something had disconnected their will. Doctors in the audience tried to intervene, but something was wrong with their instruments. Stethoscopes didn't work. Thermometers shattered. A tuning fork brought to test pitch refused to vibrate. At minute 3:12, all the lights dimmed. The magnetic tape kept turning, but now it warbled as if warped by heat. And the air itself began to shimmer. Multiple attendees later described the same hallucination. A figure, impossibly tall, standing at the back of the hall, its face masked in shadow. But its mouth was moving, not singing, mouthing, as though reciting the same phrase over and over. After 5 minutes, the tape ended. No applause, just silence. That's when the real horror began. The guests began to forget, not in fragments, completely. One by one, they couldn't remember their names, then their languages, then how to stand. When Lice arrived the next morning, they found 89 individuals seated motionless, facing forward, smiling, as if still listening. None of them could speak. Only one man survived with fragments of memory, Dr. Casimir Fold. He scrawled one sentence in charcoal before vanishing days later. The music was never for our ears, it was for what's beneath them. The third reel has never resurfaced, but rumors say the fourth is in America now, somewhere in a desert chapel, sealed inside an organ pipe that hasn't played in 100 years. They called it St. Lethea's Silence, a monastery tucked into the red stone cliffs of northern New Mexico, built by a sect that split from the Jesuits in 1899. They didn't speak. They didn't sing. They listened. Every morning at dawn, the monks gathered in a circular chapel carved directly into the rock. No crosses, no statues, only a single pipe organ, unfinished, unplayed, and sealed with molten wax. Its largest pipe stood 12 feet high, sealed with iron bolts. That pipe, locals said, had swallowed a man whole. In 1937, a traveling priest named Father Calder arrived, sent to investigate rumors of musical heresies at the site. What he found was silence so thick it bordered on oppression. He wrote, "I've never known fear in a church until now. The sound of nothing here has a shape. It leans, it breathes, it knows when you're alone." Father Calder tried to open the great pipe. The monks begged him not to. They didn't speak, but their gestures were frantic. One cut a circle into his own palm and pressed it to the pipe's base. Another held up 4 fingers, then placed one in his mouth and bit down until it bled. Calder ignored them. The pipe was opened on the 4th night. There was no sound, but every candle in the chapel extinguished. The stones grew cold, and Calder fell to his knees, gripping his head, mouthing the same phrase again and again. He's inside the keyhole. He never left. We are the teeth. The next morning, his journal was found half-burnt in the nave. On the last legible page, the reel. It wasn't music. It was a summons, a resonance that remembers itself. They resealed the pipe, filled it with salt, chained it shut with rosaries dipped in black wax. The organ has not been touched since. The last living monk, Brother Elias, was interviewed in 1989. He was blind, mouth stitched shut, but he communicated through writing. When asked what was sealed in the pipe, he simply wrote, "A vowel never meant for man," and below it he drew the same spiral found beneath Elijah Knox's skull. They didn't play the organ to awaken something, they played it to put it back. The ruins of Black Hollow had long been declared off-limits, declared unstable, declared sacred, declared radioactive even, though no proof ever surfaced. But in 2005, a private contractor, Vincent Hale, former military engineer turned underground collector, secured access under the guise of soil remediation. He brought no team, no permit, just a map, a seismic drill, and a copy of Casimir Fold's last sketch. It pointed to a vault beneath the chapel ruins, exactly 6 feet down, exactly beneath the altar, the same altar where the 12th family had vanished in 1917. Hale drilled until he struck metal, then concrete, then a hollow thud. He unearthed a coffin-shaped box, long, narrow, covered in scorched mahogany. Inside, a brass metronome, still ticking. No mechanism, no batteries, just movement, steady, impossible, terrifying. And beside it, 3 objects. A crumpled hymn sheet titled Lamb of the Pit, a single black feather fused with bone, a note written in blood and ink in Germanic Latin, "This is not rhythm, this is return. Stop it, and the hill shall breathe again." Hale left the box unopened for 9 days, but the sound got louder. Neighbors complained of phantom bells at midnight. Children reported humming in their sleep, hymns in languages they'd never learned. On the 10th night, he brought it into his basement. His wife left him 3 days later, citing invisible voices. His dog refused to enter the house. Then came the auditory bleed. Recordings played backward produced speech, not white noise, structured syllables. The metronome wasn't keeping time, it was counting down. Hale attempted to destroy it, set it on fire, submerged it in acid, crushed it under a press. It never stopped. The tick-tock went on. He finally buried it in lead beneath 12 feet of concrete in the Nevada desert. But he made one mistake. He recorded the sound, digitiz, it, and uploaded a 3-second loop onto an encrypted hard drive. The file's name, key vowel, AIF. Since 2017, copies have surfaced on dark web archives. Several listeners report blackouts. One died of sudden cardiac arrest mid-headphone session. What were they hearing? Not a sound, not a melody, but a memory older than the land. The audio file known as key vowel AAF is only 3 seconds long. It begins with a single click, then another, then a third, imperceptibly faster than the last. To the average ear, it's nothing, but fed into a spectrograph, something appears. At exactly 1.4 seconds, the waveform forms a glyph, a spiral cross, not unlike the one found carved beneath Elijah Knox's skull, not unlike the one drawn by Brother Elias in blood. But here's the anomaly. The click isn't a click. It's not mechanical. When the audio is slowed 800%, the click stretches into a voice. One syllable, low, ancient, something between a groan and a prayer. Audio forensic linguists, including Dr. Mina Callis at the University of Chicago, analyzed it using vowel spectral mapping. The result? A phoneme not native to any human language, not even ancient ones. It didn't originate in the mouth. It originated in bone. The resonance falls between 17 Hz and 19 Hz infrasound, below the threshold of human hearing, but well within the range known to induce nausea, hallucinations, and dread. This is the same range used by military weapons and by ancient cathedrals, accidentally or by design. So what happens when a human hears this bone-born vowel? In documented cases, listeners experience disorientation, loss of equilibrium, bleeding from the nose, recurring dreams involving a mouthless choir, sudden vivid recollections of places they've never been. One man, an amateur sound engineer in Oslo, listened to the loop for 9 hours straight. When police found him, he had carved 12 family crests into his walls. None matched his lineage. The FBI, for a brief time, seized the original metronome and began testing. But in 2021, the object was classified as a level 6 oral vector anomaly. Its location is now redacted. The digital file is banned from public servers, but as with all forbidden things, it still see pre-eds. Illicit versions circulate with altered names: choir, TIFF, vowel 56, black hollow loop. Each one carries the same curse. The sound is not what you hear, it's what hears you. They weren't taken, they were summoned. All 12 families, across 14 years, across fire, flood, and famine. They didn't vanish without trace. They followed a voice they couldn't remember hearing, but one they somehow recognized. It called to them through hymns, through dreams, through the stillness between their footsteps. It called through the soil beneath Black Hollow, and they obeyed. Let this disturb you. Every family left something behind. Not bodies, not blood. Blueprints, not for structures, not for machines. Blueprints for ritual. One family carved theirs on wooden planks hidden behind the nursery walls. Another burned theirs into copper discs found 80 years later in an abandoned post office vault. Each one contained timing instructions. Chants, postures, mathematical angles, equidistant spacing. An auditory structure, not for music, but for arrival. You see, this wasn't mass hysteria. This was choral architecture, a spiritual technology older than the church, older than the alphabet. Black Hollow wasn't cursed by accident. It was tuned to a resonance, a frequency that fed not on fear, but on structure, discipline, obedience. The families weren't victims, they were the choir. And on the final night, June 3, 1917, they completed the arrangement. Witnesses reported no screams, no fires, just a low hum across the hills. And then, silence. One man who returned weeks later found 13 footprints in the dirt. Not 12. 13. One set was clawed. To this day, the name Black Hollow doesn't appear on modern maps. No postal code, no public record. But if you go far enough down State Road 16, you'll feel something shift. The temperature drops, the birds vanish, and for a brief moment, only if you're alone, you'll hear it. A single ticking sound, and beneath it, something deeper, a syllable not meant for tongues, a sound not of God, not of man, but of something that predates the idea of either. The families aren't dead. They merged with the frequency, with the pulse beneath Black Hollow. They sing still, not above ground, not below, but through it. Their final message, etched into the back of the chapel altar in scorched iron letters: our silence is the invitation, your voice is the key. And now that you've heard it, you're part of the arrangement too.